I was listening to a speaker, Jordan Peterson, several months ago now, and Peterson made a remark in one of his talks that really grabbed me. I'd never thought about it in this way before. Peterson said, and I'm not sure if he was quoting or if this was original with him, but he said, "Do you possess ideas, or do ideas possess you?" Now chew on that one for a while. I think a lot of times we think in terms of possessing ideas, but the more I've thought about it, the more convinced I am that in reality, ideas possess us. Ideas influence our lives in incredible ways all the time. And there's a very real sense in which, far more than possessing ideas, we are possessed by ideas. And the thing about ideas is that ideas have a tendency over time to become not just ideas, but ideals. And when ideas become ideals, then you're getting into a quasi-religious kind of situation, which I believe is where we are in our culture today. This isn't just a philosophical war that's going on. It is very much a religious war. I was listening to a man the other day who I thought argued in a very convincing way that much of what postmodernism is advocating now, a lot of what you're hearing now, could be classified as a religion because it has all the characteristics of religion. What this means is that ideas matter. Ideas matter a lot. And unfortunately, in the war of ideas in the last 20 years, Christian thinking and the Christian approach to life has been losing. And the postmodern approach to life and to truth has begun to really hold sway. In fact, I think you could convincingly argue that now our media, our government, our schools of higher learning, our colleges and other institutions are for the most part dominated not by Christian thinking, but by postmodernist thinking, with all that goes with that. And one of the things I want us to do this evening is to begin to look at postmodernism. Because I think for most of us, certainly for me, and I feel kind of guilty about this, I said this morning, for years, I heard the term postmodern, and I just kind of blew it off. Because there's so many different venues of thinking, but I shouldn't have. Postmodern thinking has begun to dominate in our culture. It's dominating your life right now. I mean, it affects your language. It affects how you approach certain things, whether you know it or not. It does, no question about it. For instance, do you remember when a wife was a Mrs.? And now who is she? She's a Ms. And we've dropped the R, haven't we? And we don't even think anything about it anymore because it's happened over a long period of time. But we got to get away from these gender things, man. You know, we got to watch that. And it's infiltrated our culture and our thinking and our way of writing. And so now no longer is it a Mrs., it's Ms. Increasingly, when they hand out acting awards and whatnot, we don't have actresses anymore. Everybody's an actor because that's sexist to talk about actresses. And in the postmodern sex-obsessed culture, with all that goes with that, that's another thing that, you know, I was fascinated the other day listening to how these awards were being handed out and the wording that was being used. And it was all very PC and a lot of words that I was familiar with and heard all my life. I wasn't hearing anymore. There's all kinds of ways, folks, in which this is touching us and affecting even how we communicate, certainly how we look at life. It's had a tremendous impact in particularly, and I hate this, but in schools and universities. There's a big brouhaha right now in Oklahoma. Governor Stitt was kicked off a commission for this centennial thing in Tulsa because he signed a piece of legislation that would prohibit basically pushing the anti-white privilege thing that's been going on. And so he got cut up for that some. That kind of thing is going on all the time. And it dominates, again, it dominates, particularly, and this is troubling to me, in institutions of higher learning. Most colleges and universities now are incredibly PC. And when we talk about being PC, what we're talking about is influenced by postmodernism. And so if you're not towing the line, chances are you're not on the faculty. You're going to have a very difficult time if you're wanting to work on a PhD and you're moving in an incorrect fashion as far as they're concerned and getting anybody to aid you in that PhD. And people are being, I would argue, being brainwashed. Absolutely brainwashed by what's going on, what's being taught, what's being advocated. Because you see, again, they understand, and by they I mean those advocates of postmodernism, neo-socialism, they understand that if you control how people think, you control them. And if you control the information that are given to people, you control them. As we get into this, I will spend more time talking about what's... There was a fellow named Herbert Marcuse who back in the 60s wrote a paper. Marcuse is a postmodernist thinker. Came from Germany, left Germany after World War II. He was a Jew and moved to this country very much into socialism, communism, that kind of thing, postmodern thinking. And Marcuse said, if we are going to really change Western culture, change how people think here, we have got to practice what he called repressive tolerance. Now, if that sounds like a contradiction in terms, it's because it is. Okay, the first time I heard the phrase repressive tolerance, I thought, what? This doesn't make any sense. How can you have repressive tolerance? It seems to be a contradiction. But it's not. And man, is it working today? Is it being utilized as a tool today? By repressive tolerance, here's what Marcuse meant, and here's how it's being implemented. If you take a Christian position on something, if you take a conservative position on something, on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, any of the social platforms, what will they do? If you have enough influence, they will cancel you. They'll censor you out. They will repress you. Okay? And their whole goal, and it's serious, you see, I'm not exaggerating. You may think I am, but I'm not. I literally do not have the right to say what I'm saying as far as they're concerned. I do not have the right to speak. I should be shut up, and I'm not kidding you. That's where they're coming from. If it was up to them, and they may shut me up, I don't know, as far as knocking us off some stuff. But if you say what they don't want you to say, they feel like they have every right to repress you, a duty to repress you. Not just to refute you, but to repress you to where you are not heard because you don't have a right to be heard. On the other hand, if you're coming from a position that they agree with, if you're taking the postmodern position in any of a number of areas, then whatever you say is fine. And they will give you multiple platforms to say what you want to say. And the last thing they'll try to do is cancel you or censor you. And so you have what amounts to repressive tolerance. And I just want you to look at how things have gone the last few months on Twitter and on YouTube and on Facebook and these other social platforms, And what you're seeing enacted and carried out by these gurus up top is repressive tolerance. Because you see, they don't want Christian ideas shared. They don't want Christian values taught. They want to repress them. And they are. And at the same time, they want to push postmodern thinking. They want to advocate things that I'll guarantee you make your toes curl when you begin to understand what they're talking about. And they will do everything they can to see that further. That's where we're at. I mean, I hate it, but there's a very real sense in which they've won. They're on top now, and we're having to fight back. And that's one of the reasons why I'm saying what I'm saying, and we're doing what we're doing, is because that's the desperate situation, I believe, in which we find ourselves. This whole identity politics thing, and we'll talk more about identity politics later, but it's incredibly unfair. It's incredibly unfair. Okay, you're white, so you believe this. You're black, so you believe this. You're brown, so you believe this. You're yellow, so you believe this. That is nonsense. And yet that is exactly what is being pushed, big time, in our culture today. And it's all about group. Paul, you need to understand something. It's so weird. It's all about group politics on one level and individual rights on another. And when you really begin to pull at it, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's totally hypocritical. But you know what? As far as the left is concerned, and by the left I mean postmodernist, the last thing we need is something that makes sense. And you're going to say, you're crazy, Dan. No, I'm not. I'm telling you, they see reason and logic as tools of white suppression. Reason and logic need to be gotten rid of. Need to do away with them. And we'll talk more about that again later. I want to give you a feel for where we're at and why this is important and why we need to talk about this. And how alien a lot of this thinking is going to be to you because you don't think that way. And you never have. But you've got to understand that a lot of people in positions of great power and influence do think that way. And that's what we're up against. Now, I want to go back first because for you to understand postmodernism, I've got to do a little bit of history, so hang with me, okay? Because to understand where postmodernism comes from, you've got to go back a ways. And I'm not going to go back too far, but let's go back. How many have heard of the Dark Ages? Oh yeah, everybody's heard of the Dark Ages. All right, why are they called the Dark Ages? They're called the Dark Ages because in the Dark Ages in Europe, basically faith and tradition were seen as the dominant forces. Faith and tradition dictated everything. And so the church, meaning basically the Catholic Church, dominated the culture. And the faith associated with the Catholic Church dominated the culture. And so if the church said that the sun revolved around the earth, then the sun revolved around the earth. The earth didn't revolve around the sun. And tradition, by tradition I mean the way society was structured was absolutely from God. And so if you were a noble, you were meant to be a noble. And if you were a serf, you were meant to be a serf. And if you found yourself in a situation where you were nobility, you were meant to be nobility. That was God's intention. That was God's plan. That's the way it was. And if you had serfs working for you and they were dirt poor and starving to death, and one of them went into your forest and hunted one of your deer, yeah, you'd kill them. How dare they? I mean, those were dark ages. Dark in all kinds of ways. And so in about the 16th century, there came a change of thinking, and it was refreshing, and it was very, very important. And now we call it, how many of you have heard of the Enlightenment? Okay, fewer of you, but a lot of you. The Enlightenment. And what the Enlightenment basically was this reaction, was a reaction to the domination of faith, and by faith again I mean basically the Catholic Church and its culture and tradition. And they said, no, we need to replace this with science and reason. We need to be able to see and understand scientifically and reasonably what's going on in our world. And so here come people like Thomas Paine and John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and Newton, and these scientists come along, and they're using their ability to observe the world, and they're starting to say, wait a minute, what do you mean the sun revolves around the earth? The earth revolves around the sun. And they're starting to study and seek to understand how things work. And it is enlightening. Now, they have a very utopian view of humanity. By utopian view, I mean they believe that human beings are good and human beings can work together to make this world a really, really good place. And they have not rejected the idea of God. Most of these thinkers still honor a belief in a creator God and a belief in transcendent truth. They have not rejected that, okay? And so you move from the Dark Ages to the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment, again, is very, very important because that's when science and reason and logic really begin to take hold and basically replace superstition. Now, this is followed in the late 19th century, early 20th century, by what we now call modernism. And basically, modernism says that we as human beings are going to progress by increasing our knowledge. They very much embrace the concepts of the Enlightenment and the truths of the Enlightenment. But the modernists are saying, but there are certain things that are holding us back. We can be moving forward faster if certain structures in society could be changed. These structures in society aren't working as well as they could. They believe very much that for the most part, in the perfectibility of mankind. They still hold a utopian view. If we just get the right systems in place politically and socially, with the knowledge that we've gained, we can make this world a wonderful place. Now, in the process of that, though, these modernists beginning to rely more and more on reason and logic, and there's nothing wrong with that, and science, begin to want to elbow God out. We don't need him. We can figure all this out ourselves. We don't have to have a creator. We don't have to have one who tells us how to live, a transcendent set of rules. Darwin comes along early in this period, during this time. Darwin has a tremendous effect. Because you see, Darwin apparently lays out, oh, well, here's how life could have started, and you don't have to have God in it. Well, unfortunately, now we know that's garbage. That Darwinism, for multiple reasons, won't work. And scientists are really struggling now with that, trying to come up with some alternative views, because as we've gotten into DNA and as we begin to understand the complexity of the cell and of life, they begin to see there is no way that life could have just happened, could have just come about by accident. But by then people have bought into Darwin. No, we don't need God. We can look at progression of life just through natural selection and so on. Okay, we can put it in scientific terms. That makes it right. So with this thinking, understand, with this thinking of man, science, reason, logic, and let's change the social structure and let's make it better. Along comes socialism and communism and fascism and capitalism, and they're all competing. Which is the best system? Which is going to produce the best results for humanity? And you've got people arguing all of these different ways of approaching life. And so you move then into what we now call, what we've been talking about, postmodernism. Now, why postmodernism? Okay, so you've got Lenin pushing communism. You've got Marx pushing socialism. You've got capitalism going on here in the United States and in parts of Western Europe, right? How well are all those systems working out in the 20th century? Well, not so good, huh? I mean, Lenin and then Stalin are trying out communism in Russia. How's that working? Somewhere between 60 and 100 million people dead. That's how it's working. It's an absolute, flagrant, horrible catastrophe. It's a disaster. Which, by the way, when's the last time you heard that talked about? You hear people today talking about communism, and it's like, oh, Pollyanna, it's like, oh, that's fine, that's wonderful, that's a great system, man, we ought to try that. They tried it in the 20th century. Didn't work, man. Did not work at all. It was a disaster. It was horrible. Socialism. Let's do socialism. How has socialism worked? Well, let's go down to South America and visit some socialist countries. Let's go to Europe where we have some socialist countries and let's see how socialism is working. It's a disaster. It doesn't work. Now, the problem is that communism and socialism are arguing capitalism's terrible. Capitalism allows the rich to dominate the poor and control the poor. And that's an awful thing. Except, as you look historically, capitalism is leading to a higher quality of life in Western Europe and the United States than people have ever known. And you don't have a bunch of mad people at the bottom shaking their fists and screaming like Marx predicted. You know, the proletariat screaming against the bourgeois because the bourgeois have all the money and they have all the control. It's not working out that way at all. And so these people who are advocating totalitarian approaches to life, which communism and socialism are totalitarian approaches. In other words, Butto and Dan are smart enough to fix everything for all of you. And if you'll just trust Butto and Dan, we'll come up with a system that will work. Okay? Now, unfortunately, if you buck Butto and Dan have to kill you. But I mean, that's just part of it, right? In order to get the system to work, that's what, man, that's Lenin. That's Stalin. That's Mao Zedong. That's exactly their approach. That's Pol Pot in Cambodia. I'm telling you, that's their approach. We're smart. We've got it figured out. We'll make it work. And if you have to step on a few million bodies in the process in order for it to work, well, you've got to break some eggs to make an omelet. That's how they look at it. And so when you look at the 20th century, what you see is a catastrophe. You've got World War I, you've got World War II, you've got the mess in the Middle East, you've got communism not working, you've got socialism not working, you've got fascism not working. And you've got a bunch of people claiming capitalism isn't working either. And so what are you going to do? How are you going to fix it? Okay, let's invent critical thinking. That's what we need to do. Critical thinking. Now, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking, which you hear so much about today, critical race theory, critical thinking. Here's what you need to do. Here's what we need to do. You have this group in Germany, the Frankfurt group, back in the 1920s. And they're the ones who start coming up with this critical thinking theory. And that's carried over into Western Europe among the French, and then it's brought over into the States. A lot of the French are big postmodernist thinkers, critical thinkers. And basically, here's what it amounts to. Okay, for some reason, people in the United States seem to like their government. They like how it works. They like their economy. We can't have that. We can't have capitalism. That's just wrong. Same way in Western Europe. We can't have that. So, what do? Let's pick it apart. Let's pick it apart. Now, what system is perfect? There ain't one. Okay? There isn't one. And so, if you choose to pick at any system, any way of doing things, can you pick it apart? Sure you can. Critics are a dime a dozen, aren't they? Well, they should have done it this way, you know. All coaches get to enjoy Monday morning quarterbacks, don't they, Jerry David? I mean, that's just the way it works, right? I mean, you got critics around every corner. You got people that are always glad to criticize and pick. I want you to listen to what's going on today. And what do you hear? Pick, 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 pick. Okay? Because what you have to do is create unrest. What you have to do is create dissatisfaction, because if you create dissatisfaction, then disorder follows. And if disorder follows, then out of disorder can come, because we're smarter than everybody else, we can, out of that, build a system that will truly be just and truly be fair. And so you have these critical thinkers who are coming along. How does this work? Well, the game is written to where you can't win it. I'm serious. You can't win it. Here's one of the examples I use all the time. I'm working in a store, and in comes a black customer and a white customer. Who do you serve first? If you serve the white customer first, you're denigrating the black customer. If you serve the black customer first, it's because you don't trust them. You're afraid they'll steal something. And so you're a racist. And so if you serve the white customer first, you're a racist. If you serve the black customer first, you're a racist. Because in essence, you're a racist. You just don't know it. And you laugh, don't laugh, man. Everything is this way. It's constructed in such a way that you can't win. Your thinking is poison. Your outlook is poison. Your view is poison. It's tainted. It shouldn't be listened to. It shouldn't be heard. And so what do? Shut them up. Because what they're saying can't be true. It can't be right. It's not true. It's not right. Okay? That, folks, is critical thinking. And Lord willing, next week we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of exactly how this works and what goes on, because I want you to be able to see it when it happens. Because you see, I think it's been going on, you just didn't know it. Or you were going, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, you're right, it doesn't make any sense, but you don't know why it doesn't make any sense. You just know it doesn't make any sense. Well, there's a reason why this kind of thing is happening. What they want to do basically is tear down reason and logic. Denigrate reason and logic. And you've got, it's fascinating, man. You've got people who spend their whole life thinking the craziest things. And then they write them down and somebody goes, that's genius. Like, okay, for instance, let me give you a French thinker, Diderot. Diderot, you know, you read about him, you can go look him up, Google him, whatever you want to do. Brilliant man, brilliant man, brilliant man. So he decides that language is meaningless. That we use words to define words. Because the only way I can describe this microphone is with words, other words. You know, well, here's something that would filter my voice through it, and the inside of here, there's got to be some components that would magnify in some way what I'm saying, and blah, blah, blah. But all I'm doing is using words to define words that ultimately then, words are the tool of the ruling people. And so if you're up top and you're in control, and you're in control of words, then you control everything. And so we can't have that. And so what do you have then? Well, now you've got people advocating what? Let's throw out spelling, right? Because, well, as long as you can read it, what's wrong with it? And so if you want to spell sounding stuff out or whatever, well, you just go ahead. And if you don't like the way the words are pronounced, well, that's your problem, not necessarily somebody else's problem. And if they're not writing grammatically correct, hey, as long as they're writing, isn't that what really matters? Isn't that what really counts? You see, because what you're trying to do is arbitrarily put your view of words on other people. How dare you? Now, what's the result? The result's a mess. But they won't acknowledge that. They don't want to talk about that. And we've got to talk about that. The result's confusion. The result's disorder. The result's a mess. That's what they want. Because they believe out of that mess, then they can take over. No, you're being a conspirator. No, I'm not. I'm telling you, that's where they're coming from. And that's what's happening. And so when you hear all this discussion going on about all these curriculum, now tests aren't fair. Tests aren't fair. You know, because they don't take into account gender, and they don't take into account race, and they don't take into account ethnicity, and they don't take into account background. They don't take into account this and account that. Basically what they're saying is, we got to toss out reason and logic. You just got to go with feelings. Well, what if your feelings disagree with my feelings? Who's right? Well, what color are you? And I'll tell you whether you're right or not. Because you see, it's all about identity. Isaiah 5 verse 20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. More than ever, I see the wisdom of that. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. 1 Corinthians 14:33. God is not the God of confusion. He's God of peace. What these people are sowing is confusion and division. What postmodernism is pushing is not unity. It's not. It's the very opposite. It's to drive wedges between people. It's to break people into groups. Okay, that's what they're seeking to do. And that's what we've got to understand, and that's what we have to respond to in a Christian way with the Christian message, which is a totally conflicting message to that. I mean, I listened to him argue this, and I think Paul would roll over in his grave if Paul could hear what's being said now. Because what Paul preached was what? A gospel of reconciliation. Read the book of Ephesians. Is Paul telling the Gentiles, you wall yourself over here, and you Jews wall yourself off over here, and you know, these Jews are trying to dominate you, and you just can't. No, what's he saying? He's saying Jesus died for everybody. And what there needs to be is two becoming one, right? a unity among all, brought about by a common faith and trust and belief in Jesus. And I've talked way past what I was supposed to. But that's what we need to push, and that's what we need to talk about, and that's what we need to hear. And next week we'll get into more into postmodernism and some of the assumptions that they make that you need to be able to respond to people with, because you're going to get confronted by it. You are, and when you do, you need to give an answer for where you're coming from, and there are answers, okay, for why we believe what we do, and we'll look at that. If we can help you in any way in your Christian walk right now, while we're together, would you come while we stand and while we sing?